So, welcome back. So, I was thinking, you know, it would be good to make some kind of video on like pro tips for finding a therapist. And this is what I would tell, people in my own life, people that I care about who, are saying, "Hey, I'm looking for a therapist," and I don't know where to begin because there are so many therapists, everywhere, right? So how do I choose a therapist, right? It's an important question. And so, there's several things to bear in mind. So obviously the first place you're probably going to start is either asking a friend, somebody that you know is in the know, or you may consult the internet machine, right? And see if the Google has something in mind for you and what might help you find a therapist. But even then, you're, very quickly you're wading through this swamp of, excessive therapizing. And some of it may or may not be what you need or what you're looking for, or even all that great sometimes, So, so here's just some, basic tips on finding a therapist that works for you, okay? So I guess first off, assuming that you're checking the internet, right? And you may end up on a website like Psychology Today, for example. Not saying that that's the only website you may end up on, but that's a big one, right? That's kind of the Google of therapists, in a sense. So, the first thing you'll probably do is you'll search for somebody in your area. Okay, so that'll narrow it down. But then you'll be looking for somebody perhaps who deals with the type of issue that you're interested in addressing. So maybe you'll click a box for, therapists who treat depression, right? Or, maybe you'll try to narrow it down more and like I'm particularly interested in the transgender community, so maybe you'll check the transgender box, right? And that'll help narrow it down a little bit more than say just checking depression, right? But, even there, you've narrowed it down, you've done your search, and, we'll just say, the thing pulls up, I don't know, like 50 therapists who say that they work with transgender, as our example here. How likely is that to actually be a thing? And what I mean is like, okay, so we'll just say you check that box and you go to some, provider's thing. You get a little blurb. Okay, they sound reasonably nice. Their picture looks nice. I know nothing about them, so I'll just click their profile and I'll go look and see what they're about. And so, you're there and the first thing that you notice or you want to look at is like, how many things did this therapist say that they specialize in? Because here's the thing. Sometimes people will check every box. Like when you're like from the therapist side of things, if you are on Psychology Today and you are setting up your profile, Psychology Today will ask you to check boxes for things that you specialize in, and this helps you to pop up in a search, right? The thing is that people want to pop up in searches because they want to be found, and you can understand that, right? It makes sense, but sometimes people will check boxes just to pop up in a search, and I'll figure it out as I go along. How likely is it that I'm going to end up with, say, again, like a transgender client? Maybe, and if they do, I'll figure it out. I'll consult and I'll be fine. Like whatever. Well, maybe not whatever. I shouldn't say it so flippantly, but they're just checking boxes, and and the thing is that for some things, it's probably a safe bet that that, whatever therapist you're looking at has probably, hopefully, if they're like a licensed therapist, they've had training in how to deal with or treat things like depression, for example. But if it's something more specialized like that, like transgender, like this is where you really want to pay attention. So if they've checked every box, including that way more like specialized topic, you should probably back away slowly. And I don't say that to be, critical or mean or anything of that nature. It's just they're checking boxes. And, the thing is that, like, while I can't blame them, what can happen sometimes is that when you have a more specialized kind of focus like that, where there's a lower likelihood that the person has had specific training on that matter, you may end up being in a position where you're possibly the first person that this therapist has worked with who falls within that category. So, like, and it's this thing. It kind of irks me a little bit sometimes when, I hear stories about, and, the literature supports this, like, quite often, like trans clients end up having to educate their provider in order to obtain care. So there's this weird kind of role reversal. And, that's just, you're not paying your therapist to give them continuing education. I'm just going to say that. You're paying your therapist to help you through something because, in theory, they're an expert and they can walk you through that, They are your master Yoda, training you in the ways of the Force. They kind of need to know what they're doing and not just be kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing. Now, if the person wants to get additional supervision and training in an area, great, fine. We need more providers who know how to do that work, but, just checking a box willy-nilly isn't really helpful. And it may put the client, you, in this awkward position of having to educate your provider when you say, hey, I'm agender, or whatever term that they maybe haven't heard before, and they're stumped and you're having to take up therapy time explaining something that, really, so, not a good situation. So it does happen, but you want to avoid that. And a way to avoid that is, like, again, looking at the provider on their profile and seeing, did they check 50 boxes there, like every box under the sun, and throw in transgender because it's like throwing in the kitchen sink, whatever, or do they check that and then like a handful of things that are reasonably related, like from a logical perspective. So, like, another example being, I have a colleague that I know for a fact because I worked with her. She can treat whatever, like, walks in the door, but she knows her strengths and she knows what she's passionate about. She loves working with people who are struggling with eating disorders. And so because of that, if you were to go to her profile, she whittles it down. She doesn't check every box. Like, she's very focused, right? So she'll have on her profile eating disorders and things that logically make sense to go with that, like women's issues, depression, anxiety, things that logically go together. And it's, not to say that, like, men don't have eating disorders or everybody identifies as men or women, or that everybody with an eating disorder is, like, anxious or something of that nature. But, we look at, like, data and research, there's probably a good overlap between those things. So it makes sense. It makes logical sense. Like the things that she's checked kind of group together. And so, I would say, yeah, just look at that if there's that kind of thing going on in a provider's page. And, if there's something that's kind of like out there, like it seems like here's a cluster of things that seem related and there's something over here, hopefully maybe they will narrate that and explain like, oh, why they're interested in these things that are like very different. So like on my profile, I talk about being interested in, transgender clients, and, I check things that are related, like identity related concerns, spiritual or religious concerns, which can come up a lot. And so it's like, there are things that kind of make sense, but then it's like college. It's like, why am I talking about college counseling center stuff? Well, that's because that's where I've worked the past several years, so I can like narrate that, but like, so it makes sense in that way. So, there's that. But if you walk into this situation where the therapist has checked all the boxes, that does not mean that they're extra amazing at therapy and they can treat all those things at a deeply understanding kind of level. So I'm not saying that they're going to be terrible. I can't say that. They may be wonderful. But, if you have something that's really focused, like with the example of the eating disorder, I would recommend like looking for a provider that is really honed in on that specialty. Like they really love working with eating disorders. They enjoy the work. This is what they want to do. You're probably going to have or I would say there's a good chance you may have a better experience doing that than seeing the person who checks everything and threw in eating disorders for fun, because reasons. But yeah, so that said, another important thing about finding a therapist that will fit with you is just that fit. So, they can look great on their profile, or maybe they'll look really, frankly, crappy on their profile. And you're like, maybe they don't know how to present themselves well or market well. A lot of therapists are a little on the introverted side, and, so maybe like that first impression isn't the best, but they're a fabulous therapist, right? And you don't want to overlook that person necessarily, because it's, it's kind of like, they may look different on paper than they do when you actually talk to them. And they may be very competent and wonderful as a provider. So, the thing is, you need to meet them or call them or something. Reach out to them and ask them your questions, right? How do you work as a therapist? Like, what kind of approach do you take with clients? Have you ever worked with somebody with, my presenting concern before? Again, if you are transgender and the person is like, well, I've never worked with anybody who's transgender, but I've read about it in a book, that might be a different kind of experience than somebody who's like, oh yes, I've worked with lots of transgender people. And so being able to gauge that is something, that's important, and you may not get right off the bat in a profile, right? So ask. Like, if you have questions, ask, and and see how that is, and what they say. I would also say, like, if you do go and meet with them, and, it just doesn't seem like they fit, like, you don't like their approach, or they're kind of like, they make you feel kind of weird, or kind of, you should listen to that. Like, seriously, you're essentially investing in a relationship. Like, a therapy relationship is a relationship, and you're paying for it, right? Or your insurance is paying for it. And so it's important that you feel comfortable, and if you go in and this person just doesn't feel quite right, for any reason, you don't even have to know an exact reason, maybe you can't even pinpoint it, but like, something in your gut says, like, this doesn't fit, always listen to your gut. Like, your gut usually knows way better than your logic and your head. And so, listen to your gut. That's really important. And if you decide that somebody doesn't fit you, or doesn't work well for you, you absolutely have the right to say no, to give them feedback, to tell them, that doesn't fit for me, or, I really would rather not schedule another appointment. Can you offer me a referral? You can even ask them for a referral to somebody else, if you want. And that is absolutely okay and within bounds. It's like, it's absolutely okay. And, if somebody ever, like, really makes you feel uncomfortable, like they do something that's really weird that they really, like, shouldn't, like, I don't know, like, I'm thinking of a friend of mine who told me that, like, his therapist was always trying to, like, convert him to her religion or something, or, like, invite him to church or whatever, and that was, like, making him uncomfortable. Something like that is happening, like, feel free to get away. Like, if you feel like something like that is going on and it doesn't feel okay, like, feel free to get away from that. And I don't know, that's like a whole other issue for another day, like, but point in case, like, listen to your gut, and if something doesn't feel okay, then stay away. And if something does feel okay, but you're just, like, nervous, because, let's just be real, like, change is scary. Engaging in therapy can be a little nerve-wracking. You're meeting a new person, you're telling them all this personal stuff. That can be just in and of itself uncomfortable, like, so maybe you feel uncomfortable, but you're like, I have a good feeling about this. Like, listen to that. That's a good thing. And, it's probably just going to be a little bit of, I don't know, it may just be like a little bit of a search process. And so, that said, if you tried therapy at one time and you're like, this is garbage, and that person was really not helpful, or maybe they, made things worse, or whatever the case may be, that may just be that one person, like, I've heard people say, like, yeah, I tried therapy once, it doesn't work, I hate therapists, yeah, and it's like, yeah, that's valid, like, it sounds like you ran into a therapist who was not very helpful, and maybe kind of harmful in some ways, and, that's a valid experience, and it makes sense that you'd be cautious. You should be cautious if like, that's just logic, right? So that's reasonable. That means you're reasonable. So yeah, but that said, it's just like with any group of people. You're going to find great people, you're going to find people who are not so great, and it's just a matter of, like, finding the one that fits. And the one that fits for you may not be the one that fits for this person over here or that person over there. Everybody has a different style, different personalities, different approaches, and so, yeah, if you tried therapy once, it didn't work, or you didn't like it, maybe it was the therapist. Maybe it wasn't, like, anything wrong with you or anything wrong with, like, therapy in general. Maybe it was just that therapist. So try somebody else out if you feel like that's comfortable for you, right? Or okay for you. And then finally, last, but maybe not least, technique. So technique is, or the way that somebody approaches therapeutic problems. There's this kind of interesting thing, like for some problems that people may have, there's certain approaches that are probably going to work better than other approaches, and there's research backing for that. So like, I don't know, just a weird case that I saw. I ran across a therapist years ago who treated trichotillomania, obsessive compulsive hair pulling, trichotillomania, with psychoanalytic therapy. So anyway, no judgment, but yeah, so maybe that works. I don't know. But the research suggests that there are maybe other ways to address that. So sometimes there can be a therapy approach that makes better sense based on research to treat a problem. A lot of times, though, like, it's the relationship itself that is healing. So there's kind of a balance between putting too much stock in a certain technique or approach versus not putting enough stock in it. There's a reason why to become a psychologist you go to school forever, and yeah, it's not just so that I can, I don't know, sit here and stare at you and go while you talk. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe some people that's their approach, and that's okay, no judgment. But it's like learning certain techniques can be helpful while still holding on to what the research actually suggests, that the biggest thing that helps in healing is like just the human factors that go into a therapy relationship. So, to get a little nerdy and technical, like technique accounts for 15% of the variance of what actually is healing in therapy. Whereas, the client's factors, like the resources they come in with, like their personality, their social support, things of that nature, that's about 30%. 40% is going to be therapy relationship factors, like how genuine the therapist is, how much they empathize with you, genuinely empathize with you, and what we call unconditional positive regard, which is basically like, I see you in your struggles and in your pain, and I'm going to hold you well. I'm going to still care about you. I'm not going to like reject you, and think poorly of you because you told me this really painful thing or this thing that you're ashamed of. Like, no matter what, I am like here for you. Unless you're like, making me feel unsafe or something, like, don't threaten your therapist, like not a good day, but, yeah, things you shouldn't do, right? But, yeah, it's like, that's like 40% of the variance, like those relationship factors and like how genuine and empathetic that relationship is. So like altogether, like 70% of what is healing in therapy boils down to like the relationship, which goes back to, again, why it's so important to find a therapist who fits for you, right? Again, 15% is therapeutic technique, and another 15% is actually placebo, like your own mind healing yourself, because you have faith in the process, right? So, yeah, that's great. And by the way, if you want to look that up, I would recommend you could type in Norcross, Norcross, and I can't remember the exact paper publication or whatnot, but like the Norcross textbook like has this beautiful pie chart and discusses all of this and has like a lit review on all of that. So there's multiple resources that like back up what I'm saying. So yeah, so I'm not just like pulling random numbers out of the sky. So in any case, to sum it up, check out their profile, and if they are a specialist in everything. They're probably not a specialist in anything. See if, like ask them questions, connect with them, the phone, in person, bring your questions and just follow up, right? Listen to your gut. If your gut says this person doesn't fit, listen to that. If your gut says, I'm nervous, but I think this might be something good, well, maybe you should listen to that. Just have a little faith in your own intuition. If you've had a bad experience in therapy in the past, that's really crappy. And, it makes sense that you would have caution. And, and I hope that even in that case, maybe if it feels safe to you, give it another chance. Because you might find somebody that surprises you and maybe can help you to not carry what you're carrying all by yourself, right? And maybe that could be good, but it is a risk, and it makes sense to be cautious if you've been burned in some way. There's a lot of good therapists, and then there's some that maybe, were not great for you. And then, again, like therapeutic technique, their style, their modality, some people say I'm CBT, some people say I'm psychodynamic, and it's like, that's important to an extent, but the biggest thing is like, how much does this person fit? And, and it really matters, like, sometimes if there's like a particular issue that has like, for a phobia, for a specific phobia, I'm not going to psychoanalyze your spider phobia. More likely than not, I'm probably going to do exposure therapy, right? Because that's what the literature supports. And I don't want to knock other people's approach, but, evidence-based practice has its merits, we'll just say, to put it nicely. But, even there, though, the biggest thing is, like, the relationship itself. And if it feels safe and it's supportive and this person you're working with genuinely cares about you and takes your feelings into account, that doesn't mean that they're always, like, going to make you feel comfortable and floating on a magic pillow somewhere, but, like, they may push you outside of your comfort zone, and that's good too, but it is with your consent. Like, ultimately therapy should be done on the basis of ongoing consent. And if something doesn't fit, something doesn't work, you don't like something, or you don't like that therapist, you absolutely have the right to say no. And that is okay. So everything must be by consent. So with that is the spiel that I would even tell my own friends. Like, if you're looking for a therapist and you don't know where to begin, or how to narrow it down, or how to find one that fits well for you, that's what I would honestly tell people that are in my own life that I care about, and what I would tell to you too, because ultimately I want everybody to have a good therapy experience. Therapy can be a really powerful way to address your emotional wounds, but I also am of the mindset that really, like, anybody could benefit from therapy to some extent. Like, who doesn't have room to grow, right? So, I want everybody to have a good experience, and part of it is fit, So, that said, I wish you the best of luck, in finding a therapist that you like, a therapist that works well with you, and don't be afraid to try out different ones. It's okay. So best of luck to you, and take care.